1971, Charlton Heston roamed a silent Los Angeles, dodging torch-wielding mutants and clinging to the last threads of humanity. The Omega Man was bold, bizarre, and full of choices that still raise eyebrows today. But behind the scenes, even stranger. From hidden plot points to wild production decisions, here are 15 weird, unexpected facts about the Omega Man. Stuff you probably never noticed, but once you hear it, you'll never watch the film the same way again. Number 1. It wasn't the first version of I Am Legend. A lot of people think the Omega Man was the first movie based on I Am Legend, but nope, it was actually the second. The original adaptation came out in 1964, called The Last Man on Earth, and it starred horror legend Vincent Price. That version stuck much closer to the novel. Vampires, isolation, and a pretty bleak vibe overall. But the Omega Man? It took a totally different approach. It ditched the vampires and turned the story into more of a stylish, action-packed thriller. Instead of undead creatures, we got creepy albino mutants in cloaks who hated technology and lived by torchlight. The movie leaned hard into that 1970s post-apocalyptic look. Leather jackets, big guns, and weird psychedelic touches. And of course, it starred Charlton Heston, who made the whole thing feel bigger and bolder. He brought that intense, last-action hero energy, even if the script strayed way off from the original story. So no, it wasn't the first I Am Legend movie, but it was definitely the most out there one. Number 2. Charlton Heston gave himself vitamin shots on set. Here's something weird you definitely won't see in the credits. Charlton Heston reportedly gave himself vitamin B12 injections during filming. On set. Not through a doctor, not off camera, just right there in between takes. Heston was known for being intensely committed to his roles, and during the Omega Man, he was already in his late 40s. The physical demands of playing Robert Neville, running, fighting, crashing cars, and dodging mutants took a toll. So he took matters into his own hands, literally. Crew members recalled that he would just roll up his sleeve, grab a syringe, and inject himself with a B12 booster to keep his energy up. No big speech, no asking, just stab and go. Very Neville of him, honestly. Whether it was a health kick or just a bit of old-school movie star grit, it definitely adds to the mythology of the film. Imagine playing the last man on Earth, and also being your own personal medic while filming. Now that's commitment, and more than a little bit weird.
Discovered check.
Number 3. The crucifixion death scene wasn't in the script. One of the most striking images in the Omega Man is right at the end. Charlton Heston's character, Neville, dying in a pool of blood with his arms stretched out like he's being crucified. It's dramatic, symbolic, and honestly kind of intense. But here's the wild part. That moment wasn't even in the original script. The crucifixion imagery was added later, mostly to reinforce the film's growing religious undertones. By the end of the movie, Neville isn't just a survivor. He becomes a literal savior figure, sacrificing himself to save humanity. The blood he gives, the cure he passes on, the way he dies, it's all deliberately messianic. And yeah, maybe it's a little on the nose, but that was kind of the point. The 70s were full of big, bold metaphors, and this one hit especially hard. So if you thought you were reading too much into it when Neville dies like Jesus, you weren't. That scene was made to send exactly that message. Number 4. One of the first interracial kisses in science fiction. In today's media landscape, an interracial kiss might not raise eyebrows, but back in 1971, it definitely did. The Omega Man featured one of the earliest interracial kisses in a mainstream science fiction film, between Charlton Heston's character, Robert Neville, and Rosalind Cash's character, Lisa. It wasn't just a background moment either. It was bold, direct, and unapologetic. And for the early 70s, that was a big deal. At the time, Hollywood still wasn't used to showing relationships like this, especially in genre films. Science fiction was known more for aliens and laser guns than for pushing social boundaries. The filmmakers knew what they were doing. In fact, screenwriter Joyce Corrington said that Lisa's character was written with the changing cultural landscape in mind, especially the rise of the Black Power movement. Lisa wasn't a damsel. She was strong, outspoken, and took charge. So yeah, while the Omega Man is known for mutants and empty streets, it also made a quiet kind of history, one kiss at a time.
Now what's this stuff about me being the only girl in the world?
Number 5. The movie looks bigger than its budget. Here's something sneaky about the Omega Man. It looks like a big-budget science fiction epic, but it really wasn't. In fact, the movie had a modest budget, and the crew had to stretch every dollar to make it feel like the end of the world. There weren't huge sets, no fancy visual effects, and definitely no CGI. Most of the deserted Los Angeles scenes were shot on real streets using natural light and clever camera angles. Many of the interiors, like Neville's apartment and the lab, were just redressed sets reused for multiple scenes. Some critics at the time even said the movie looked a little too much like a TV production, especially in its lighting and editing. But that scrappy approach gave the film a strange, gritty charm. It made the loneliness feel real, like the world had fallen apart quietly. Not with a bang, but with an awkward, low-budget whimper. The result? A movie that feels bigger than it actually is, even if you can kinda tell the Plague Lab is just the same room with different lighting. Number 6. Rosalind Cash was nervous about the love scene. So here's a fun behind-the-scenes moment. Rosalind Cash, who played Lisa, was a little nervous about filming the love scene with Charlton Heston. And honestly, can you blame her? Heston was already a Hollywood legend by then. He'd played Moses, Ben-Hur, and now this post-apocalyptic loner surrounded by mutants. That's a lot to take in. According to Heston himself, Cash joked right before shooting the scene, saying, "It's a spooky feeling to screw Moses." He included that quote in his autobiography. And yes, it's just as funny and awkward as it sounds. Despite any nerves, the chemistry between the two worked. Their relationship gave the film a bit of heart, even if the romance was a bit rushed. More importantly, it showed a black female lead standing confidently in a genre where that was still incredibly rare. Cash may have felt unsure in the moment, but her performance left a lasting impression, and she held her own opposite one of the most iconic leading men in Hollywood. Number 7. The soundtrack was built from separate tapes. The soundtrack to The Omega Man feels eerie, polished, and surprisingly modern for a 1971 film. But under the surface, it was a bit of a Frankenstein job. Composer Ron Grainer, best known for the Doctor Who theme, crafted the score using a blend of traditional orchestral elements and experimental sounds. One of the most distinctive features was a haunting organ line. But here's the weird part. The organ wasn't recorded with the rest of the orchestra. Instead, it was laid down separately on its own monophonic tape reel. For the original film mix, and later for the soundtrack restoration, engineers had to manually sync the organ tape with the orchestral tracks, lining them up by ear to recreate what audiences heard in theaters. It wasn't a high-tech solution, but it gave the movie its signature mood: lonely, offbeat, and slightly unhinged. So the next time you hear that ghostly music echoing through the empty streets of Los Angeles, just remember, you're hearing something literally stitched together from different sources. Number 8. Charlton Heston basically shoplifts a car. One of the coolest and weirdest scenes in The Omega Man is when Neville crashes his car, and then just casually walks into a dealership and steals another one. No drama, no alarms, no paperwork. Just picks out a fresh set of wheels and drives off like he's shopping for cereal. In the context of the story, it makes sense. He's the last man on Earth, or so he thinks, so why not help himself to whatever he wants? But let's be real, there's something hilarious about the way Heston does it. It's so casual, it feels like he's done it a dozen times. Car wreck? No problem. Just grab another convertible off the lot. This moment became iconic for its weird mix of apocalypse and luxury. Neville's world may be falling apart, but he's still rolling through LA in style. It also gives us a strange glimpse into the fantasy of total freedom. No rules, no money, just you and the keys to the city. Kinda messed up. Also kind of awesome.
All right, how much you give me in trade for my Ford? Really? Thanks a lot, you cheating bastard.
Number 9. The Omega Man inspired a science fiction comic in Argentina. Most people don't realize the Omega Man didn't just influence Hollywood. It actually helped spark the creation of an entire comic book in Argentina. In 1977, just a few years after the Omega Man hit theaters, Argentinian writer Robin Wood and artist Ricardo Villagrán launched a comic called Mark. The story followed a lone survivor navigating a devastated post-nuclear world filled with danger, mutants, and lawlessness. Sound familiar? That's no accident. The creators openly admitted that Mark was directly inspired by the Omega Man. It wasn't a licensed adaptation, more like a spiritual sequel, reimagined through a Latin American lens. Instead of Los Angeles, The backdrop was a futuristic wasteland shaped by local fears of war, collapse, and authoritarianism. Despite its unofficial status, Mark became a cult hit in Argentina and other parts of Latin America. It stood as a testament to how powerful stories cross borders, and how one American science fiction movie helped shape a whole new world in comic form. Number 10. The mutants weren't vampires. They were albino Luddites. If you've read I Am Legend, you probably expected bloodthirsty vampires. But in the Omega Man, that's not what you get. Instead, we meet the Family, a group of creepy, light-sensitive albino mutants dressed in robes and ranting about technology like it's the devil. These weren't traditional monsters. They were more like a cult, rejecting everything from electricity to science. Their leader, Matthias, used old-school religious preaching mixed with anti-technology ideology to control them. No fangs, no garlic, just torches and blind hatred for the old ways. It's like if Dracula joined a doomsday church and banned smartphones. This shift was intentional. The filmmakers wanted the antagonists to feel more symbolic, less like monsters and more like the backlash of humanity gone wrong. The result? Villains that were weird, unsettling, and kind of hard to pin down. Sure, they might not follow vampire rules, but they gave the movie a strange, haunting atmosphere that still holds up. Plus, glowing eyes and creepy chants? Still nightmare fuel.
He does not bear the marks.
Marks.
Show him, my children. Show him the pretty marks.
Number 11. They shot empty LA on weekends. If you've ever wondered how the Omega Man made Los Angeles look like a ghost town, here's the secret. They filmed it super early on weekends, mostly on Sunday mornings, when downtown traffic was at its lowest. Back in the early 70s, they didn't have the budget to shut down city streets or use CGI to erase people. So the crew had to race the clock to catch those eerily empty shots before the city woke up. Still, eagle-eyed fans can spot a few bloopers. In several scenes, especially wide shots, you can catch glimpses of cars moving in the distance or people wandering through backgrounds. It's not always obvious on a casual viewing, but once you notice, you can't unsee it. This creative workaround gave the Omega Man one of its most unforgettable qualities. Neville cruising through a deserted city in the daylight. It's haunting, quiet, and strangely beautiful, even if someone's grandma accidentally photobombed a few takes. Number 12. The studio rejected the original script. Before the Omega Man became the movie we know, the first version of the script was rejected by the studio. Why? It was considered too dark, too slow, and too close to the original I Am Legend novel, which leans heavily into psychological horror and moral ambiguity. Warner Brothers wanted something more commercial. So they brought in screenwriting duo John and Joyce Corrington to rewrite it from the ground up. The Corringtons stripped out the vampire lore and went for a broader, more action-driven approach with themes of religion, science, and even racial tension. It was a big shift, and not everyone was thrilled, especially fans of the book. But from the studio's point of view, it worked. The final film may not have pleased purists, but it was easier to market and reached a much wider audience. So while the end result is far from Matheson's original vision, it's a weird product of Hollywood compromise. And it might be the reason the Omega Man became a cult hit in the first place. Number 13. Richard Matheson wasn't a fan. You'd think the guy who wrote I Am Legend would be excited to see his book turned into a big-budget film, right? Not really. Author Richard Matheson wasn't exactly thrilled with the Omega Man. In fact, he barely recognized it as his story. In interviews, Matheson admitted he didn't even mind the changes because the movie was so far off from his original vision. He once said, "It's so far removed from my book that it didn't bother me." Translation: do whatever you want. That's not my story anymore. To be fair, the Omega Man ditched a lot of what made I Am Legend groundbreaking. The internal struggle, the tragic twist ending, and the idea that the monsters might actually be the new normal. Instead, the film went for action, religious symbolism, and a clear good versus evil dynamic. It's still a fun movie, but if you're a fan of the book, don't expect a faithful adaptation. Matheson sure didn't, and he basically disowned it with a shrug. Number 14. It repeats the same shots without telling you. Here's a subtle but strange thing about the Omega Man. Some of the shots are repeated in different scenes, and unless you're paying close attention, you might never notice. Because the film had a tight shooting schedule and limited locations, the editors reused several wide shots of Neville driving, walking through empty streets, or patrolling the same parts of downtown LA. It's not super obvious at first, but once you spot it, you'll catch the same palm trees, same building angles, or even the exact same car crashes showing up more than once. Sometimes they change the camera angle or flip the shot to disguise it, but yeah, it's the same footage. It's like cinematic déjà vu. This trick helped stretch the film's runtime and gave the illusion of a larger world, without needing to shoot dozens of extra scenes. Sneaky? For sure, but also kind of brilliant for a movie pretending to show a global apocalypse with only a few square blocks of LA. Number 15. It's basically a science fiction Jesus story. It might look like just another post-apocalyptic survival flick, but the Omega Man is actually packed with religious symbolism. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Charlton Heston's character, Robert Neville, isn't just a scientist with a cure. He's framed as a messiah figure, the last hope for humanity, literally sacrificing himself to save the world. That final scene where he dies in a fountain with his arms stretched out like a crucifix? Not subtle. And yep, that pose was very much intentional. The group of mutants, the family, even acts like a dark religious cult. They reject science, fear technology, and call Neville the devil. Meanwhile, Neville represents knowledge, progress, and ultimately, salvation. It's not just surface level either. The screenwriters leaned hard into these themes. Neville's blood becomes the cure. His death allows the last remaining humans to survive. He's a lone savior in a world that's lost its way. So yeah, mutants, machine guns, and a side of Bible-level symbolism. The Omega Man is way more theological than it lets on. So there you have it. Mutants, messiahs, and vitamin shots. The Omega Man might be from 1971, but it's still one of the weirdest, most fascinating science fiction films ever made. Which of these facts surprised you the most? Drop a comment, give it a like, and hit subscribe for more deep dives into cult classics and cinematic oddities.